Hello and welcome to episode 108 of the Building Sustainability Podcast. I'm your host, Jeffrey Hart, and join me every fortnight as I talk to designers, builders, makers, dreamers, and doers. Together, we can explore the wide world of sustainability in the built environment by talking to wonderful people who are doing excellent things. And our wonderful person this week is once again Jenny Ford. This is the second part of our conversation recorded in October of 2023. In this episode, we're going to talk about the tiny homes community in Bristol. We're going to talk about how that's fed into thinking about material stores in terms of how we reuse materials. We talk about the FactoryX project that Jenny is spearheading. There's meanwhile projects. There's inspiring projects. It's a wide-ranging conversation. It's a great one. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So before we get into the podcast, there's a little bit of news. First of all, for anyone who listened to the entire of the Dave Cockcroft episode, hidden at the end there was a secret little spoon giveaway, the first spoon that was carved in the Nettlecombe Craft School. All you had to do was put a comment on an Instagram post, and I am going to choose a random number. It's number 18, who is Ken Neshim. Well done, Ken. I will send you a message on Instagram and you will be getting that spoon. I hope you enjoy it. Speaking of the Nettlecombe Craft School, tomorrow when this podcast launches, we will be starting a competition. You can win yourself a free day course at the Nettlecombe Craft School. Or if you want to come on a multi-day course, we'll knock half off a 2-day course or a third off a 3-day course. And not just that, we'll throw in camping as well. We will cook you dinner over the fire and we can sit around the fire and have a pleasant evening together. Hopefully that's a thing you want to win. If you do want to win that, head on over to the Nettlecombe Craft School Instagram. I'll stick a link in the show notes. There'll be a post there and you just need to follow the instructions. Speaking of the spoons, normally at this point I would say all the new patrons who support this podcast. This week there have been none. So So if you would like to fill this awkward little void in the next episode, get your name read out on the podcast, feel good for supporting the podcast, potentially get yourself a spoon if you want to go for the higher level of support, then yeah, that would be super great and so appreciated. Just recently, I have been driving around the country, bagging interviews here, there, and everywhere, trying to build up a bank of podcasts so that during the next few months, which are going to be very busy for me, there will be no break in episodes being released. What I have realized is that driving around the country is actually really quite expensive. So if you do appreciate that and you want to support the podcast, then please head on over to patreon.com/building sustainability. And you don't just get to support the podcast, you also get loads of bonus content. There is actually 20 minutes of bonus chat from this conversation with Jenny where we talk about hemp, we talk about retrofits, particularly the blogs that go with them. We talk about the RSA. We talk about strokeable lime plastered walls. There's some interesting and useful bits. What else is on there as a bonus? There's a whole episode with Will Stanix, a episode with Flo Hamer, the tiny house builder. I just put up a whole conversation all about cob and various other little snippets and segments that didn't quite make it into the full released podcast. So currently there's well over 10 hours of extra bonus stuff there to say thank you for your cash. Okay, I think that's all from me. We start this episode by talking straight about the tiny homes community in Bristol. And you might notice a little tiny trickling noise in the background that I didn't realise until the very end of the conversation was there. I believe it was a little cat drinking fountain. Hopefully you see it as some kind of biophilia-inducing happiness receptacle rather than just needing a wee. Okay, I am back at the end. This episode is super heavy on links. You can find all of those links in the show notes, things we've talked about. So make sure you click through and find out more about all of the really interesting stuff. Okay, here is Jenny Ford.
like we were talking about how you describe yourself and what you do. Often when you describe projects, you want to tell someone about the vision for it, and that's where things get really large and like I can see myself fitting into this, but I don't quite see where. And then obviously there are like smaller elements where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that I understand that and I can take that role and for this period of time or whatever. So it happened that when I met Rachel, we were doing there was a tour of Merry Hill in Lockleys, which was one of the community land trust projects that they kicked off. And I think we were just walking down the slope sort of near each other. And she was like, are you Jenny? And I'm like, you Rachel? And like we just heard of each other, you know, we kind of knew what each other were up to, which I find endlessly flattering. It's amazing when people know what you're up to, isn't it? And yeah, we kind of like just had a bit of a chat, and then she said she'd be interested to talk to me more about a current project. So I guess at that point they had this sea mills site, and so that similarly to what the Snug was involved with, the City Council in Bristol has been trying to match self-build demand. So they have the self-build register and people register demand, and then they kind of need to make available equivalent amounts of land. But it doesn't need to go to the people on the list per se. And so different community-led housing projects or community groups get together and they will write a bid for one of these pockets of land. And sea mills, there was this kind of two sites that were opposite sides of a road. It used to be a construction training centre. And so one of the sites is more complex because that's where they carried out the training, and the other one was classrooms. I believe it was classrooms. And essentially they put a proposal together for that site for the tiny homes community. So it's that bit where you're describing what this community is and what a tiny home sort of approach means, which is not, you know, just talking about little tiny residencies. It's about a community way of living, having enough stuff so you've got your personal dwelling space and you can operate in a comfortable way for all your kind of personal time that you need, and you can be by yourself. But then you also have these kind of shared facilities and live, with that community. And the opportunity then that represents to have, you know, so you don't have to have a spare room. You can have a shared space that everybody has a sort of can offer as a spare room to a relative or a friend that they've got staying, which is such a beautiful thing. So you don't need to buy a house that's got 3 bedrooms just because occasionally your parents come to stay. Yeah. You know, which I really like this idea. And as she kind of like explained more and more of the sort of concept of that approach, I found really exciting. And the other element was that she'd heard that I was interested in this circular economy approach and interested in, well, materials in mind is the name of my company. So, you know, that's what I'm interested in, is how we think about them, how we kind of like explore what materials we have around us already to use, and then what materials we might bring into a project. So that was exactly where they were at that moment. And so it was just a sort of serendipitous meeting, which I seem to have such a lot of. It's beautiful. It's such a nice thing. And again, I think that's like the more you chat about what you're interested in or what you believe in, what you're passionate about, the more, you know, other people do that. And then those kind of conversations just sort of like find one another. And so, yeah, they wanted to explore. So they had a quantity surveyor in place, and that was also really great because Alan Northern, who is the QS, is working with the iStruct and the like basically low carbon delivery and impact reporting, and they had an event really recently as well, actually the same day as the Reuse Summit, so I had to go to the Reuse Summit. But yeah, essentially, like he's really interested in how we report on those materials, and how we reduce the kind of distances that we're transporting them. So if it was materials that we had to get rid of because we couldn't use them because there's contamination, etc., like how we quantify them on site, and then how we find a person locally who's able to manage those materials in the best possible way. And then me and Rachel were discussing how we're going to transport them, whose responsibility is it, or how do we make sure that it's like a good transportation method, and does it really need to go? Can they be treated on site potentially? So just opening up the thinking a little bit. And then with the existing buildings, there'd already been a bit of a discussion about whether they could be retained, whether they would suit the project, and not really just because of the way they're configured on the site and the amount of site that they take up. Their sort of orientation on the site didn't really work. But there's definitely elements of them, like the slabs. Do the slabs need to come out? Actually, the bricks are like older bricks.
Nice.
So yeah, we can definitely like reuse a lot of that. And then the conversation sort of shifted into, well, we've got quite constrained sites here. They're quite small. And if we're trying to do landscaping, there are other consultants. There's permaculture consultant, there's, building consultant. We've got the quantity surveyor and engineers and myself. And we've all kind of come together and come apart and come back together to think about the challenges with wanting to work in a particular way, wanting to retain as much as possible. And actually what the crux of the matter is that although we want to retain materials, a lot of them will need to come off site.
Right.
So that then raises the question of where do they go? How do they stay as local as possible so that we can do what we need to do to those materials, store them for as long as we need to store them, and then bring them back to site? So, we invest in a little tiny electric vehicle where we can, transport them down the road. And that then led to conversations with the council about what the availability of buildings is, like what stock do they have that we could potentially use. And it's such a challenging conversation, but it really is, for me, exciting that Tiny House wanted to pursue this and are really proactive in pursuing this conversation with the council. So it's not just me kind of like having a vision of like what I think is needed to support circular activity. Here is an actual example of a community with a project that is, in motion, that has a real example of materials that need to go but are totally reusable on that project. And how does the council facilitate? Because they've already facilitated the land side of things. They're invested in this, right? So how do they then facilitate that storage need? And that really just kind of like fits in with my kind of like broader goal, which is the FactoryX project. But the other things that Tiny House is asking for, and that is really helping me to think about what what my business is offering. And, like I was talking about my role as a consultant and like trying to, that you're constantly trying to like feel out what that looks like. And, having now defined that I am a circular economy practitioner and consultant, what does that mean I offer? Whereas before I might have gone, I can support you in researching materials and procurement. I can help you interrogate supply chain, or I can help you write supply chain questionnaires. That it could be as broad as anything, and I do site waste management plans and all sorts, which I can still do. But it really feels that actually what Tiny House are after, and what we've kind of come out of the initial consultancy period is taking the sort of Re-London circular economy statement and creating one that is suitable for a small project, and building Bristol's first circular economy statement and a methodology for reporting against it. And that's as a co-piece of work between Materials Online and Tiny House Community Bristol, like feels like such a nice output to have when we've done it. The output we will have, because it's a really demonstrable piece that we can show the council, we can show other small building companies how we did it, and how, like, with limited resources, limited budget to put towards it, actually how it helped shape and guide the project, and wasn't that much additional work. It was just a different way of framing it.
Yeah,
fingers crossed.
I'm sure it will show that.
Yeah, and I think like then that covers things like the detailed material audits. It enables that continued discussion with the council, and it explores that piece around like the necessity of storage to facilitate this activity. And it's not just us who's going to be asking for it. And I feel like the more we talk more openly about what we're trying to do, the more other people will realize that they have storage problems on site, that they are throwing away lots and lots of reusable materials. We're seeing adverts all over the place, anywhere from like the ACAN chat of people who've just done like a bit of home renovation and got some hemp bats to spare, to other new build projects around the city where you see like kind of a listing or you see a skip full of particular materials and you're like, well, if only we had a place to put them, we could have found a way to use them on the project. Because the other thing with tiny houses is that they're really open to being having an adaptable design. So creating a planning document that shows the building methodology but has a way to keep the and this is a really interesting thing with circular economy and materials, secondary materials market, is that we need to create a way for projects to say, this is what we're going to build and achieve, but our materials palette needs to be flexible because we don't know exactly what materials are going to be available, but we want our materials to be, this percentage secondary materials. And so if we need to change insulation type, we will do that. And if we need to change, cladding type, we need to have the flexibility to do that. And I think that's where, sort of moving towards that more FactoryX conversation, when we're talking about circular economy, it's really got to be a piece that, policymakers, planners, construction developers, builders, and clients and the general public have all got to be part of that conversation.
So, I mean, you've said the term FactoryX a few times now. What are you talking about?
Yeah, cool. It's something that's been on my mind for a really long time. It feels like when I was writing my dissertation, I just really recognised that I wanted to look at ways, because I'm from sort of a workshopy background. When I moved to Bristol, I worked in a foundry, and the foundry was in a small industrial area full of different workshops. I've always had like a studio, which has generally been in a sort of cluster of workshops. And I'm seeing a sort of decline in those. And so sort of responding to that, and then responding to this thing around, just endless amounts of like waste and offcuts and material potentials that are like, basically flowing out of our city. We buy them all in and then they all flow out. Like I was interested in kind of how I could connect those things. And then the more experience I had working with, Snug, and then a lot of like timber framers and other conventional, traditional construction businesses in the last few years, have helped sort of solidify this idea of having a sort of systems-led facility, and in the centre of the city, ideally, in the middle of a regeneration space like Temple Quarter, where it could be an active space within a long-term building site. So these material flows could be captured and have a space to go. So it would provide that one storage solution. It wouldn't satisfy, kind of around the city. We'd need a network of these storage solutions. But ideally, it would provide a construction reuse facility that was in a place where there was a high flow or high traffic of materials flying around. And we could capture those and we could rechannel them into projects like community-led housing projects, like self-builds. But also other small builders might, they're very resourceful people. So actually knowing that you've got this alternative stock, and lots of things would still be new products, because we're talking also surplus and offcuts. We're not just talking, sort of what other people might put in a skip as waste. But then we also have other materials that could maybe be challenge there. So I was like, okay, let's create a site where you've got a construction reuse facility. What about those materials that maybe can't be used, and how do we kind of take this sort of like workshop, sort of what I liked, and there was an example, and it might have been in one of the Richard Sennett books on like the craftsman or something like that, and he talked about the Fiat car industry, or the Fiat car manufacturing process supply chain, and it was basically lots of specialist manufacturers, kind of workshop based people, and they would be like the best at doing that particular job. And I was like, well, you could have a sort of incubator where you've got a material that can't be reused. So maybe it goes out the back door and it goes to a sort of connected factory thing where people can test how to work with it. What could this material become? How could we put it back into the built environment industry? Because as I mentioned, like the built environment industry offers a space for materials to be locked up for quite a long period of time. And so ideally, even if they're ideally, has the potential.
Yeah.
And if we can turn them back into building products, if we can put more waste back into the building industry, used in the correct contexts, or, the best possible context, then, maybe by the time they reach the end of their useful life as that product, we've got a new solution for it, and this is why I'm really interested in kind of like agile business formats. So you're constantly trying to solve problems, basically. And so there was that part of it. And then at the end of 2021, maybe, I might have the wrong year, but the Richard Bacon report on self-build and custom-led housing was really eye-opening. And he had like 4 or 5 kind of top recommendations. Pretty much number one was that we need a sort of European style show park model for the UK. And at that moment, everything made sense. When I was in college, we learned about FactoryX, which was sort of the amount of dematerialization each country needs to go through to hit this point of circularity, regenerative sort of economic models, and it was just like, okay, so I started calling it Project X for a while. That's just like, I want to attach it to that concept. I want to think about this in terms of, the impact of materials across the industry. And I am involved in low carbon modular building. I'm, working with kind of regular construction companies, looking at materials and procurement and stuff. So actually, if I had a space that had a reuse centre, what else would I add to it? Like, I could totally have a show park, where you could demonstrate, because, we have these expos at, the Excel or the NEC and many other places, but they themselves are quite wasteful. You've got these pop-up exhibition stands, the carpets alone probably.
The carpets do my head in.
Nightmare. And everything associated, as much as they have reusable elements, just the transportation, everything about them. But if you could have more dedicated sites within cities so that each place could start to look at what the skills that and products and offering was already available regionally, and sort of bring that together in one space. So then you could represent and be agnostic about it. So, I think we're never going to find one solution that suits everyone. There's so many people that have been, that are very long in the tooth within their sector or their material palette, that you need to find the best solution for them. Yeah. They're not going to just have a complete U-turn. But there are all sorts of solutions on the table for a more low carbon and toward net zero future. And so having pitches that you rent. So in Europe, they have these show parks that are kind of like off motorways, and people will go to them because they have a higher percentage of self and custom build in places like Germany and other kind of Central European countries, of which, there are many. I don't know everywhere that has show parks of this particular kind. I know that he visited with the head of the National Self-Build Association a couple of places in Germany and a couple of other.
Because the self-build market in Germany is massive, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe his percentage, it was like over 50% of people have a self or custom built house. So custom being you've commissioned a builder to build what you want.
Yeah, there's definitely a slight definition confusion there.
Yeah.
Because I think to some people, self-build is like, I have held the saw.
Yeah.
To some people, it's like, we've designed it. To some people, it's we've built a thing. Like, we've had built a thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of off the shelf, but it wasn't there before.
Yeah.
So
the sort of grand design's definition is very broad.
Yes.
Because there's definitely a lot of people who maybe just have a say in how it's designed. They tell you what they want to achieve with their home, and then someone comes in and designs it. So it's architect and contractor led, but it is custom.
Yeah.
And that often, is under that umbrella of self-build. And these are like little villages. And so people will wander around, they'll be able to go inside and see how these homes are laid out, see what the other options are. So that there'll be a number of models that they can see. They can have conversations with like the salesperson, but the contracting company. And it basically kind of see homes that are, these are modern standard homes. And we don't have anything equivalent to that. We have places like the Swindon Self-Build Centre and then these expos where you can see occasionally some modular builds, but they're still quite few and far between, and definitely much more of the kind of like large scale production. But mostly we're looking at products, kind of ventilation systems to windows to high-end kitchen installations and things. And lots of things in between. But what I sort of would love to see, and what FactoryX proposes, to sort of like rent pitches to different organisations and potentially coalitions of natural builders. So so you can have sitting alongside a few modular or volumetric or kit of part companies, because I feel like that's definitely somewhere where the council and the local authority wants to push, and so that there is support for that in the region, but also to have people who represent building with local agricultural products and traditional techniques. You
mean the hippies, don't you?
I
hang on, I take that back. You mean what would Gervais calls them, the hairy?
Craig White, he said he wanted his deep green and hairy.
That's it, yes.
Like a little bit of that, but I think like it can be, even those can be finished in such a sort of modern, sleek way.
Not to say rustic and a bit rubbish.
Like, I mean, what I'd love to see here is like, like ideally affordable homes. The modern that there was a housing lab built in Apan outside of Mexico City, and forgive me if I'm saying that totally wrong, I don't know how to pronounce it, but they brought together 19 architects from across Mexico and responded to sort of 4 different climate areas, and designed a range of like visitable buildings that responded to the material palettes of those regions, and had them all in this housing lab along with a training centre.
Looks great. I want to go play there.
I so want to go and visit. I don't know what its kind of like status is at the moment, like how it operates, but certainly like drawing from all these different kind of ideas of what a show park or a innovation centre or a industry hub might look like, bringing them all together and going, we need a space that is functional, so it's got that material flow into it, builders can access it, it's got an operational side, but that also is for visitors, so that you can create like show homes and spaces, but they all are reflecting a really kind of broad and deep range of what's available now and what actually it does mean to be low carbon. And so that's represented. And then to, alongside that, put a training facility so that actually the local universities, we've got 4 universities in the region, we've got construction colleges and construction colleges who actually kind of want to be involved with modern methods of construction and other things. We've got organisations like the Green Register who do training provision in all sorts of spaces, and have like a place that they can call like a home or a hub, and so they can see those buildings being installed. We can have them as event days. We can,
when you're training, you can go, and we're doing this, and that's the finished product. It can be used in that way.
Yeah.
Here are 4 different examples of this thing that we're training you in.
Yeah. And this is, if we, on this particular example, FactoryX could be on a meanwhile use site. So we might have to look at temporary foundation systems and actually...
Do you want to just explain meanwhile use site?
Yes. So in this particular context, we've got a regeneration site that's probably going to be worked on for about 25 years. So you've got buildings that are cleared, sites that are cleared, and then that won't be built on for a number of years.
Right.
That could be 2, it could be 5, it could be 20. And so occupying and making use of that site on a sort of temporary basis and through some sort of contract, either with landowner or developer. And, sometimes then meanwhile uses can go on if a program is delayed or a project is delayed. They can feed into things. So there's some really lovely examples. In Bristol, actually, we've got quite a lot of meanwhile use projects. So Art Space, Life Space, they take on buildings that have not yet been demolished or are sort of between uses.
Yeah.
And so they create artist studios and shared kind of office facilities and things. Most recently, they've got the Sparks project on Broadmead, which I'm also a little bit involved with.
Of course you are.
But yeah, that's a massive department store. So between Marks and Spencer's leaving and whatever it's going to be in the future, they're able to work with, in this case, working with Global Goals Centre to occupy a giant space and find, ways for it to be used and ways for it to be of benefit, so that the council can, say, look what we supported.
No one wants just another closed down shop
No.
on the high street, or it's not really a high street, is it? But
no, it's a high footfall area.
Yes, yeah. And it's fantastic in there.
Yeah.
Sorry if we could take this little tangent for a minute. I went in there for the first time today. I didn't actually know it existed until I'd seen something you posted. And I just wasn't entirely clear what Sparks was. And as soon as I saw it from the outside, I was like, oh, I know what this is. Loads of little independent makers and, well, why am I explaining it? Explain it.
Yeah, it supports the independence. It's also a space for organisations within the city. For example, we have a travel agency. So it remains a department store on the ground floor, and a department store with a difference. So we have the travel agencies, for example, which has got half a First Bus in it. And it usually has someone from First Bus who talks about local travel and can respond to people's inquiries. We also have Dr. Bike that pops up every Friday in the travel agency area. We've got a Department of Energy. So there's someone from the CSE, Centre for Sustainable Energy in Bristol, who is there just to talk about energy to people and maybe how you, particularly in this kind of like crisis time, and now we're getting to the point where we need to use our heating more, how we keep our bills low. They can talk to people about their concerns and maybe make some suggestions. And then you've got like the ethical gift shop. We've got cafe area, vegan cafe now, fashion department, which is all independent traders.
Nearly bought some Carhartt dungarees today.
Oh, nice. Yeah, fashion repairs. So they'll do like visible mending workshops and all sorts. And then over in sort of we're the horse fair side. So it's got 2 entrances, which is the really nice thing, is because people use Sparks as a cut through. And
nice.
As they're cutting through, you're exposing them to like, what's this? Like, and just so many things that like, you know, a regular person in Bristol may not have ever come across before. And in the middle of the ground floor, we have the Global Goals Centre. So that's an education charity, and that's a classroom space. And they're educating around the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and on which the One City Plan of Bristol is based. And at the moment, every lunchtime, they're showing films in there. So a mixture of feature and sustainability films.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'm really hoping we can show Sand Wars soon, because I think particularly for people who work in the building industry, if you've not seen Sand Wars, it's a very eye-opening and distressing, but really important thing to understand. And you can apply that distress and thinking to any material once you've seen that, I think. But yeah, that's great. And then I helped establish the Department of Reuse and Resources. So we set up a repair cafe in that space. So we have Bristol's first city centre repair cafe. And in fact, it was International Repair Day on Saturday. And we did some talks and some demos in there. And it was really lovely. And yeah, we're sort of co-hosting with Emmaus, who's a homelessness charity, who have a reuse shop there. And we have a new Department of Stories as well. So yeah, it's all.
What's the Department of Stories?
It's a bookshop, but it's a queer and feminist bookshop.
Nice.
And yeah, they're trying to kind of find ways to connect with the other departments and bring in kind of people who make zines and speakers and do signing days, but use the shop floor rather than kind of hide those things away in the department. How you kind of use the rest of the shop floor space. But as an example of like Meanwhile Use Space, that's a really nice one, because that was two organisations coming together. And so Art Space, Life Space are upstairs with Global Goals on the ground floor. And actually thinking about, one thing that's really great is that I've now been developing my relationship with Art Space, Life Space, who have a massive amount of experience in Meanwhile Use. And as I take that thinking and that knowledge and their sort of expertise forward into looking at sites and thinking, okay, like, yeah, there's lots of knowledge in the city around how we can use spaces and how we have that conversation with those people who are landowners or building owners. And I think, yeah, it's really exciting. And I think the nice thing with FactoryX is that it's so scalable. So I'd kind of broken it down into 3 phases. I feel like I've done like all the talking. Do you like insert talking later?
No. This is good. No one wants to hear me talk. So I kind of broken it down into 3 phases. The first kind of being establishing a sort of like digital platform and community. So what I think FactoryX will really thrive on is the sort of idea that this is a systems and community-led initiative. I'm not trying to reinvent anything. What I've done through kind of like the last few years is just scanned everything that's out there and gone, it would be amazing if that came to Bristol. It would be amazing if we could showcase this. It would be amazing if we could take what you've learned and apply that here, and work with those people to make that happen. Also, how you frame the space. So I'm calling it a low carbon, construction show park. Again, this has been a hard one to pin down what I'm calling it, but loosely a low carbon construction show park. And I was trying to like fit a low carbon construction show park and operational space, like taking it away from just being a show park to like making sure that people know this is a functional entity. And that will come into the title when I finally figure out exactly what it is. Show park seems quite empty, doesn't it? Quite.
Yeah. I wanted to use it because it aligned with a piece of work that had been commissioned by the government and was a top recommendation. So I'm like, if I call it a show park,
it's
I
directly
feel like
linked. Yeah.
That I'm tapping into what he was saying we needed. And there definitely is an element of show park about it. But I think actually what the important bit now is to build that community of people who want to be involved in the space. And so to kind of build this this coalition of organizations, to build this community, and for the next kind of few months, define what I mean by low carbon and define what we mean by low carbon. Because also, if you're trying to be agnostic about solutions, there's a lot of people who work in the industry who are like, we should stop using this material. We should definitely not do any of this. Or this is the way forward, everything should be timber. And as much as I'm not going to argue with any of those people, I think, we need to find a balance. And so actually trying to find a definition that helps create a community in which they feel comfortable, but they also feel comfortable sharing that space with someone who's on a different end of the spectrum, but is also working towards a future where we are using less intensive materials, we are creating less impact, and we are making the most of the material flows around us. I think it's like finding that mutual space, and that will help me probably define more what FactoryX is called. FactoryX full stop. First phase is building that community and the sort of bringing in a digital element, which I think at this stage is looking like the excess materials exchange. And this is a Dutch model that has been piloted in Meridian Water with Enfield Council, and more recently in Northern Ireland. They've done their second pilot, and they are looking, they were calling out for places who were interested in helping them scale and helping them duplicate that model across the UK. And so, we're sort of in discussions about what that might look like in Bristol, but it is a digital platform, and what I really like about it is that it's industry focused, and a lot of what we have now, if it is building focused like Salvo or sort of that equivalent, it feels like it's very DIY, maybe like it's serving a lot of different markets. And then we've got kind of Gumtree and Facebook Marketplace, which is very much kind of any user. But the excess material exchange, and partly because of how it's been used so far in the UK, feels like you could get developers involved with it. It feels like a place where if you were a builder and you wanted to incorporate, or your client was interested in incorporating secondary materials, this is a place that you would use comfortably.
And is this so it's a directory of or it's listings of excess materials that people are selling, or?
I believe at the moment it's an exchange space, so I don't know that any money changes hands. There's certainly no money involved with the excess material exchange, but I'm in this sort of early days with our conversation, so we'd need to find out more about that. But what is nice is that you can be on there as an organization or as a project. So if you had a particular site that you were working on, you could list everything that was available at that site. Or if you had several sites, I think you can list yourself as, your construction name and then all the products that you have. And what they're looking at now, which is really exciting, is the sort of the digital overlap with that. I mean, it's the digital platform, but actually using these, AI and volumetric capture 360 cameras to go in and scan buildings.
Right.
And, for me, building out, like having FactoryX as like a crucible of circular economy thinking and practice, and how that can like build up and increase in sort of like momentum and volume across the city. So using things like this, where you go into a building that's going to come down in 6 months or something, you go in there, you scan it, and you tag up all the items. So actually someone's like, I'm looking for fire doors, they see a listing, they go in there, they can move around the model, or they can visit the physical building. They'll go, I'll take all your fire doors, but actually while they're in there and they see all these other items, and when you tag them, you can add a lot of information. So you're starting to look at material passports, which is essentially a sort of data tag that you can attach to a physical product that contains things from like the chemical makeup of a material. If this is a new product, especially, you'll look at that side of things. But it will have its dimensions, its application, whether it's got warranty. It's, they'll have the useful information that you'd want.
So sort of in the example of a fire door, like if, say, the regulations change in 2001 or something, it's like, this door does this thing to this standard, you can put it in your new building knowing that it's going to satisfy all of the things.
Yeah, which is probably a fairly unlikely situation, but you can obviously apply all the information about the fire door, and you can also say, it's unlikely that this could be used as a fire door. But in the example of the Canada Water development, so Global Generation, who are a community garden, so they've set up a number of community gardens in London, starting in King's Cross, and they basically work with developers to take the waste to build the garden space. And then they are also meanwhile projects. So, learning from their experience as well. They've got a project in Canada Water at the moment called the Paper Garden, which is based in an old Daily Mail print storage shed. And they took half the roof off and have done the community garden, and then the other part is the classroom. And so they've worked with British Land, who have been managing a number of contracts, and the local developers who are building on the land around that site. And yeah, there's some really interesting buildings there. That's a whole other conversation. But actually, there was also a building that was being regenerated, or deep refurbishment, and all the fire doors came out. And do you know what they did with those fire doors? Flooring. So in the classroom, ooh, I went in for one visit and all the joists were down, and they were saying, we're going to bring in these fire doors. The next time I went there, all the fire doors were down, and you can see the holes where the furniture went in the floor.
Yeah.
And then my last visit, it just looked like new flooring. Like they'd filled in all the holes and it had all been sanded down. Oh. What a use of...
Because they're solid timber, aren't they, those doors?
I mean, amazing. And that saving on that giant floor that they needed to put in, really good use of that material, like really sturdy. And also not something that really stretched anyone's minds too much. I mean, it was suitable for the application they wanted, and it could be laid very easily. And the only thing they needed to do was, the finishing.
And a door is, in some ways, it's probably easier. A door takes up a lot of area, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds like a great thing.
Yeah. So I've sort of got conversations going with those people, and what I'm really hoping to do is invite a lot of these different groups who have got experience not only around utilising and setting up local secondary material sort of flows, but also around the contracts. Mm-hmm. So how did that work contractually? How did that work with your engineers? How were they on board with this? How did that work with the client? And some of the questions that will, are bound to arise, like around warranty and insurances. So they've built up a massive amount of knowledge in this area. So actually bringing them into this conversation and working with them to help shape what this looks like as well. And hopefully, using it to attract, more interest from people, maybe have like a conference with them. That would be nice.
Nice.
Bit of a summit.
Yeah. Oh, love a summit. I get what's come into my head a little bit is, so up to now, it seemed like the reusing of material has been very sort of low or sort of grassroots. In like lots of permaculture people have, built their shed from all the little bits they found, and it's always, they always look a bit shabby.
Yeah.
And I think that puts a lot of people off. And so this all seems very much like it feels very proper.
Yeah.
And talking to a completely different group of people to be used in a different way.
Yes, I agree. I think that, and I think it's a necessary step. I think, the whole circular economy is a really big transition. And I think it's all doable with the right infrastructure. And when I talk about infrastructure, I'm not just talking, physical spaces or, specific parts of the industry, but also the training and skills provision, how we talk about it to communities, like what things like repair cafes, how we embed those kind of, cultures, which actually, when we talk about secondary material markets, they've been around for such a long time. There was just a blip where we lost them, or we lost familiarity with them and how they worked. And then we lost all confidence in, using secondary materials. And it's crazy how short that blip was in the sort of like history of time of communities and building and all these things. So it's so possible to get it back. And there's still people who were involved in those secondary material industries. So, for me, it feels like it's not too hard to get back to there. It just requires a lot of the right conversations and the right people to help move it. And that's what I'm really interested in helping manifest, I think. But yeah, like making it feel professional is part of that. I think that there's so much with, I'm not going to get into retrofit because it's such a massive subject, but there is going to be so many materials and mechanical systems and other systems that come out of deep refurbishments, commercial refurbishments, and domestic retrofit. It's going to be generating a terrifying amount of material. So we need spaces and different thinking to help us, because I go to retrofit events quite frequently because I'm interested in that space and going through a retrofit myself. But no one is talking about materials out. It's either about how we do it, how we deliver it and the skills needed, or materials in. Like there's just nothing around materials out. So I'm championing that cause. I think it needs to be brought into the conversation. But there are loads of manufacturers who are now looking at service options instead of just selling things. And that's particularly around like raised to access flooring, lighting systems. Some of the, extended like manufacturing warranties, and, there's loads of mechanisms for it to happen. It just needs to happen more and more widely. So yeah, I have a certain degree of confidence. I'm definitely a possibilist. I think actually that I decided that after reading Flourish.
Okay, yeah.
Which was an amazing book. I had it on audio, and I do my yoga and listen to Flourish and feel really like, afterwards it's like, you're like, oh God, things are terrible, but I can do this. This is
who's Flourish by?
Michael Paulin and Sarah someone.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah.
Always. Do you know what? I've been sat listening to this conversation going like, I've got so much work ahead of me with the show notes for this one. It's like a million things I'm going to link to.
I got little links I can send you.
Yeah.
Always. Yeah. But yeah, they talk about the idea of being a possibilist in there. And I really like it because I think all the solutions are out there and there's loads of people capable of developing even better solutions. It just requires a whole heap of us to help move it along.
Yeah. Brilliant. This is a very good thing for me to hear right now. I've been, when you're just overwhelmed with the badness and how things seem to be going.
Yeah.
It's been getting me down.
Yeah, I think it's and there is so much, and then you might read a positive thing, but then the next thing is like, I think that like I said to you when we were chatting earlier, I've had kind of 3 weeks of workshops and events which have really buoyed me, but I think the whole of this year just kind of talking about what FactoryX could be and having so many people respond really positively to it that, I know the appetite's there, and I know that, see all these different things, and I know people are trying to do the right thing, and I think sometimes it's just not framed quite correctly. But yeah, I feel like I'm part of something quite big, and just like have been having so many kind of positive conversations that it's helping me to stay above, the other
maybe
the constant skips I see that I'm always taking pictures of that just make me feel really sad.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, of just the photos that we all have of our little nerd outs. Like my collection of photos of walls that have been repointed with cement, and then it's blown out the bricks, and now all that's left is the repointing. I've got loads of those.
It's so funny, isn't it?
It's like probably comparable to your
skip
album.
I feel like I've been wanting to do a zine for ages. I set up a not-for-profit, which is kind of how I'm operating in Sparks, called No Small Thing, which very nicely kind of represents what we're talking about, being part of something that can actually have a lot of traction and make a bigger difference. But it was really to satiate my desire to have a comic strip.
Yes.
And I worked with an illustrator to do me like a whole kind of a few stock images. So there's like a character in it, and and then we did like a deforestation scene and a landfill scene. And I was like, I need to have a skip. I need to have a skip that's like empty and a skip that's full. And I feel like I could add a lot to this skips, but now I'm thinking of different ways I can use all my skip images.
It was all worth it.
Rather than it just eating up a lot of data.
Yeah.
I'll set myself a personal challenge of
you need to reuse
something.
your skip photo. Yeah. That's the first reuse project.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely high priority, right?
Oh, yeah. So where are you in the FactoryX journey?
So I have been pitching it for about, let's say, a year, to lots of different entities, from sort of modular housing companies to Bristol Housing Festival, to representatives from the council, to chat to the green building store and people at the Swindon South. But partly it's getting the conversation out there and looking for people who might want to be part of it and partner with me, to now this new conversation with the Excess Materials Exchange, to kind of pick up this digital element. And I guess the conversation with the council is really around the meanwhile use of site land for storage. And there's a couple of developers who I've started conversations with who have bigger projects in the city, but they have workshops that are sort of part of a site, but that won't be developed for some time.
Right.
And they could be potentially, starting off, FactoryX kind of small. It's definitely at the moment, it's more about building that community, getting that definition, finding that way for everybody to feel comfortable working together towards this shared agenda. And all the time, just trying to find myself the perfect site, even if it's like, for 5 years, 7 years. I think that Global Generation and their projects have really shown that 7-year sort of model can do absolute wonders. So I know those spaces are available. So now it's really kind of picking up the pace on getting one. And I think just to sort of on that bit, I think we're all really familiar with those sites that you walk around your town or your city or wherever and see those sites that have got a fence around them. They've been cleared, but there's this giant pile of brick rubble on it. Assemble, the London-based architecture practice and designers and architects and artists did this really amazing project called Otto Project. And I don't know whereabouts in London it was. I should know because I look at it all the time. But essentially, they had a site available to them that was full of rubble. and they sacked it all up into sort of bags and like pillow-sized bags, and built a building out of them, like they were blocks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sort of like earth bag, but rubble.
Yeah. Yeah. And essentially that rubble then is super available for next use. It could even be reassembled into other sort of buildings. But then they put a trussed roof on top, and it was an event space for some period of time.
Brilliant.
Absolutely brilliant.
That's fantastic.
You know? And you think about the kind of sites where those rubble piles sit for such a long period of time. If you could then make your distributed storage spaces on those sites. So I think actually there's so many conversations that could be had. It's really, for me now, bringing together these organizations, these groups who have had the experience, who have tried different things, and try and get as many people into that conversation as possible. And just show them all these like really inspirational projects that are like happening. They're really easy to do. Like, they're not complicated. You get the right engineer and the right, you know, person to sign off on it, who kind of has, you know, some understanding around it. I don't see why, like, and I think there's probably a lot of people who would like to see something happen with their sites.
Definitely.
You know, especially if it involved some income to them. You know, better if it didn't, because then we wouldn't have to pay for it.
Yeah, well, I suppose, yeah. If it can create an income for them, then there's more incentive.
It's the incentive, yeah.
That opens up more bits of land, doesn't it?
So. And some of those sites are for, you know, affordable housing or social housing projects. And so actually they should have additional incentive of doing something that is for community good, or that can, you know, go to the benefit of like wider society and these kind of new economic systems. Yeah.
I mean, the bit of land, I know you've got your eye on. I don't know. Have you got your eye on it?
Yeah.
It's actually a plot that I used to walk past every day on the way to my studio. And yeah, do you want to tell us like why it's a good?
Yeah. So the Temple Quarter area, as I mentioned, is like earmarked for a mixed use regeneration over, you know, a 25-year plus period of time. It is right behind Temple Meads Station. It's an area that is St Philip's Marsh, so it's mixed sort of industrial use, and parts of it have been kind of dilapidated and vacant for quite a long time. And I think those are the sites that are moving forward more quickly. But essentially, a lot of those, the area is mainly used by industry. There's some residential cut throughs and bits and pieces, but this particular road is like a dead end. It's also slightly out the way, but it's in the middle of the regeneration area. So I feel like in terms of like traffic conflict, it's thinking about like the best kind of sites that you could have to make this a functional model. So it's walkable, it's on a cycle path, it's close to the station, it's actually close to a community, so it's close to Button Hill and Lawrence Hill, and that means that you can build those community ties, you can, you know, make roles available in this space, you know, make it feel like somewhere that they can come to. Like, otherwise it's a giant building site and is eventually going to be tower blocks. So, you know, if something can kind of help integrate what's happening within the regeneration area, which is just a bridge away, you know, it's like literally under the bridge and then you're in Button Hill. It's just such a great site. It's next to the river, or the feeder canal. So you can also start to think about how you would govern the transformation of this site using kind of permaculture principles. So being very cautious about like the movement of materials and runoff from different building practices and sharing that too. I think it's just it's such a sort of it's like the last building, it's the last site on that road. So, you know, traffic conflict is totally kind of reduced. It's really visible, like it's just below the flyover, so people could see what was happening inside it. Like I said, it's on a cycle path, it's on a walk through to Barton Hill. It's got a kind of slope. It kind of is naturally divided into a few sections. It did have a warehouse, which also would have been perfect for the reuse centre, but the warehouse has come down. And it does have a giant pile of rubble in the middle of it now. So
I like that so much, that bagging up the rubble. It reminds me of there was a story about, I think NASA held a competition on how would we build on the moon, and all these people entered saying like we'd send up all these trusses in rockets and stuff. And it was the guy from Cal Earth, I don't know if you know those, like Earth bag building in California, who said, well, I'd just send up loads of bags and we'd use all the rock that the moon's made of and we'd make that. It's like, don't spend lots of rocket fuel sending up really heavy things.
no.
It's like really minimum interaction with using the abundant resource.
Yeah.
It makes me so happy to know that they've done that.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. I love sharing that project. And get them along as well to the summit.
Yeah. How would you get that site?
I've tried to find out who it's owned by. The signage was very confusing.
Probably deliberately so.
Probably deliberately so, indeed. I have looked on a couple of sort of land ownership sites, but I guess because I was still in the development of the theory and the sort of like how FactoryX, and I was kind of building the pitch at the time. At the same time that I saw this site, I haven't devoted a huge amount of time to investigating further. But yeah, generally that's where this conversation with the council is sort of going now. And actually through the Future of Construction boot camps, we do site visits, and our last site visit was Temple Quarter, because I couldn't not. And we were working with the Temple Quarter regeneration team. So it's really been talking to them about, how do I find out this next step? So I'm having those conversations with them. I was a bit disheartened when I saw that so much work had happened on it. But actually, that doesn't, like I said earlier, with these meanwhile spaces, a lot of time, there might be blanket clearance and nothing happens then for some time. And because I think I understand the proposed scheme, that I don't, it looks like residential towers in that space, and that really won't happen until there is more sort of general infrastructure and sort of
there's not
facilities.
Really anything there, is there?
No. So I don't think, so I think it is, but it's still a conversation that's on the table.
I sort of want to create a call to action. Yeah, getting people to get in contact with you. And who do you want to hear from? How do you want to hear from them?
Yeah, so I think from each of the different kind of stakeholder groups, really, I'm interested in hearing expressions of interest, I guess, understanding how people feel that they could participate or what they'd want from a site or a project like FactoryX. And so that could be, if you're a low carbon house builder of any kind.
The spectrum.
Yeah, like, would you be interested in having a pitch on FactoryX, having a show home there? Definitely want to hear from you, because like helping to shape that offer and how that would work, how we would make that viable for people is really, really important. If you have experience of using secondary markets, I think that's also a really interesting conversation, because I think that's the bit that needs to come first. If you're a Bristol-based builder and this is something, or a developer, and this is something you're looking for, like for me to build that evidence base and use that to kind of, get investment for the project, or to sell the idea to the council and say, this is really, really needed, and look how many people are asking for this. I think that's also really critical. And if you're a landowner and you own that site,
that's the dream.
Or any site in that area, I'm interested. And I think just having more conversations with people who are particularly interested in any of the aspects that we've talked about with FactoryX, really happy to sort of explore them as expressions of interest and sort of future things that might want to be built into the model. Responding to demand, isn't it?
And how do people get in contact?
So I'm in the process of building a FactoryX landing page, which will have a button that you can connect with me on. But you can also contact me on my Materials in Mind site, or just hello@materialsinmind.org.
Nice. Is there more?
Also on LinkedIn.
Also on LinkedIn, yes. I always feel weird contacting people on LinkedIn. It doesn't feel like my natural home.
No, I found it really useful this year. It's very interesting because LinkedIn is very echo chambery once you are connected with all the people. But actually, I wouldn't know about all these projects if I wasn't on there. It's been a really, really useful thing. But a bit of advice for people using LinkedIn: don't just get connections because you want more connections. Like, focus on who you want to be connected with, the type of industry and the type of roles that people have, because they're the people that will share the most useful information. Otherwise, you've got to scroll through complete, irrelevant stuff. And I feel like this year I've really nailed LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of being...
You are LinkedIn.
I am LinkedIn. I totally am, yeah. I'm being fed constantly really interesting and useful stuff.
All right. Thank you, Jenny. That was so great. I'm so excited about FactoryX. Just so excited to dig into loads more of those things we talked about. I did want to say that when we were talking about the hairy, Gervais's hairy building and Craig White's dark green and hairy, I think I wanted to clarify what I meant there. I didn't want it to sound derogatory. And it's actually kind of tied into what I've been thinking about quite a lot recently about my own work. And that is the difference between what you might call a craft builder and maybe a more conventional builder. And the craft builder, I think, works more with materials than with products. So it might be a straw bale builder or someone who is making clay panels kind of in a one-off way, making their own products in a sort of way. Yeah, the results might be no less beautiful, often quite the opposite, but just sort of achieved in maybe a less scalable manner or less instantly scalable manner. So that's what I meant by that. And hopefully I've dug myself out of that. I more often than not put myself in that craft building category. What else to say? Oh, yes, if this conversation went on for another 20 minutes where we chatted through hemp and retrofits and the RSA and strokable lime plastered walls. If you'd like to hear that, then you can do so at patreon.com/building sustainability. That is where you can support the podcast and as a reward, get bonus little bits of conversations that didn't quite fit into the episode. So get on over there for over 10 hours of bonus content. I mentioned at the beginning that there would be lots of links in the show notes. I'll just run through those. So Materials in Mind, which is Jenny's company, Tiny Homes Community Bristol, the Reuse Summit, Letty Circular Economy Statement. There's 2 links to books by Richard Sennett. There's The Craftsman and Building and Dwelling Ethics for the City. There's the APAN Housing Lab, the Green Register, who are great, based in Bristol. We actually had Lucy Pedler from the Green Register on the podcast way back on episode 12, I think. I've linked to that episode as well. There's a link to Art Space Life Space, Sparks Bristol, Global Goals Centre. There's also a link to the Sand Wars film. Also a link to the episode of this podcast with Kieran Pereira, where we talk about her book, Sand Stories. There is a link to the Excess Material Exchange, the Paper Garden project. There's the book, Flourish. There's No Small Thing, which was the cartoon project. The Assemble Studio Otto project. I realised actually that's something I've seen before, and I'd completely forgotten about it. So link to that. And there's also a link to the Cala Earth website with a bit about the NASA project. Okay, I think that is everything from me. A reminder of that competition going on at the Netcom Craft School. Head on over to Netcom Craft School Instagram to be part of that. And otherwise, I hope you're doing really well. And I look forward to coming back in a couple of weeks with a really fantastic episode all about building with cork. All right then, until next time, bye-bye.